basically we have a large collection relating to a Manchester company called Paterson and Zochonis. They're called Paterson and Zochonis again now. They have gone through a change of name where they call themselves Cousins because they took over Cousins, the toiletry company, in the 20th century, and that was actually their better known brand at one time, but they've now gone back to calling themselves Paterson and Zochonis because the company was named after two people, surprisingly. Mr. Paterson, who was a Scot, and Mr. Zochonis, a Greek, and they were traders who worked for a trading company in Sierra Leone and decided to set up their own trading post in Freetown. And eventually they set up trading posts in other parts of West Africa, and their headquarters was in Manchester because one of the goods that they were engaged in trading was, not surprisingly, cotton. And what they were all about in the early days was about making wax prints and basically commissioning. They had designers who worked in Manchester but who had obviously been trained to understand what was needed in the West African market, and they commissioned the cloth from other manufacturers and then they branded it with their own trademarks. So they didn't actually, they kind of bought in the grey cloth and they had the cloth made up, but they didn't own factories themselves. They were what are called merchant converters. And they had an extensive trade, not just in the British rule parts of West Africa, but also in some of the French colonies. And the company had a very high reputation. And one of the points about it was, this is actually not made in Britain. This one dates from the 1960s, so we've got a whole series of ones dating from the 1960s with their design registrations. And some of them are the genuine wax prints. And the point about the genuine wax prints was that they continued being made in Britain, and apparently it still had enormous snob value that on the selvage of the cloth you had genuine English wax print, and that made it more desirable. These, the fancy prints, which aren't proper wax prints, but they mimic the look of wax prints, were actually made increasingly in West Africa. And in the case of Paterson and Zochonis, they had factories in Nigeria, which was obviously a requirement after independence because Nigeria had such strong indigenisation policies. Interestingly, you'll also see something relating to this company upstairs. Until, well, it's still going on, but it's about to finish. This trade of wax prints from Manchester to West Africa still happens today, beyond the point where you would have thought it was economic. And there is one company left that does it, and that company is called A. Brunchweiler and Company, or ABC. And they're based in Hyde, in Manchester. But the problem is they got taken over a few years ago. They're now part of an enormous Chinese corporation called the Char Group. And having moved their lower grade wax print facilities to Ghana a couple of years ago, they are now about to close down the production of the very high quality wax prints and move that to Ghana too, although the design facilities are still going to stay in Britain. But finally the economic realities have caught up with the British wax prints, because obviously making them in this country and transporting them to West Africa, you can make it, you can save a hell of a lot on transport by making them in West Africa. But this one, I picked this one out, which I find interesting, because this one, as I say, was actually printed in West Africa, and in the designs that we have from the 1960s, you've got a huge range of different imagery and different kind of sources of inspiration. But this one, obviously, slave bracelets and chains, and I find this quite a weird design, because I would think, what would you think he was saying by wearing this?
It's interesting to understand that a lot of the Africans, they didn't actually know what was going on in the Caribbean. They knew that Africans were being taken away from the continent, but they didn't know what was going on. They didn't know that they were being made to work on plantations and they were getting whipped and all that sort of thing. They had no idea. So to me, this is like some kind of sick joke. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like making a cloth and putting a swastika on it and then giving it to a Jewish person to wear. You know what I mean? This is what that is. This is somebody's idea of a joke.
Call it taking a piss.
Well, yes, exactly. So there'll be African people walking around wearing symbols of their own enslavement and not knowing what it is.
Yeah, I can imagine
And the person who designed this, he's laughing every time he sees an African person wearing that. You know what I mean?
And it's the same thing. I find that I found the images on the blocks strange as well, because I can't see as trademarks how that would be appealing, but how that would be something that would make you want to buy something. But and it's particularly when you contrast this, and I've got a box of more there, but they do take up a lot of space, so I haven't got more out. But at the same time, they're producing prints that, for example, one of them is celebrating Nigerian independence. There's another one that's got tickets from a football, celebrating a football match between Nigeria and Ghana. You've got ones that are showing railways being built. You've got ones that are showing televisions. You've got ones that are showing couples dancing to records on record players. Things that are talking, and then you've got that. And it's weird.